Chapter 1. The Sound in the Fog. The sea mist rolled in like a living thing, thick, cold and muffling. It shrouded the coastal village of Whitehollow in an eerie blanket that obscured even the outlines of the jagged cliffs. From the bay below came the rhythmic crash of waves against the rocks, and farther out, rising through the fog like a disembodied wail, came the mournful call of the old lighthouse horn. Long since decommissioned, the lighthouse had not been manned for 15 years. Yet, that night its sound came clearly, low and chilling, vibrating through the mist like the echo of some ghostly signal. At precisely 10:17 p.m., the guests at Windward House, an aging cliffside estate perched at the very edge of the headland, were disturbed by that sound. Some rose from their armchairs with unease, others merely exchanged curious glances. But one among them, Lady Eugenia Hargreaves, the hostess, turned pale and dropped her brandy snifter with a crystalline shatter to the carpeted floor. "It's the horn," she whispered, "but that cannot be." The assembled guests included a peculiar mix: a literary critic with a drinking problem, a fading stage actress with a penchant for dramatics, a quiet young secretary with nervous hands, a retired naval officer with a stiff jaw, and in one corner, brooding near the grand piano, sat Mr. Archibald Playfair, the financier with charm as brittle as spun glass, and secrets coiled behind his smile. There had been tension in the house all evening, not overt, but the kind that dripped between conversations and hovered in the silences. It was a reunion of sorts, an annual tradition Lady Eugenia had revived after a 5-year hiatus. She had claimed it was for nostalgia, but her sudden, unsolicited invitations had suggested something more pressing. Now that dreadful sound had plunged the already strange evening into something almost surreal. Before anyone could speak further, the butler, Forley, entered the drawing-room. "Begging your pardon, my lady," he said with a troubled expression. "There has been a development. I believe you should come to the library." All eyes turned to him. "What kind of development, Forley?" asked Lady Eugenia, her voice brittle. The safe, my lady. It's been forced open." Forley's hands trembled slightly. "And Mr. Playfair, he's not in his room." The group followed Forley down the dark corridor, the hush among them more than just silence. It was fear. In the library, a heavy scent of gun oil hung in the air. The old safe behind the portrait of Lord Hargreaves had been brutally pried open. Papers littered the desk, and a faint scuff mark stained the Persian rug. But what drew every eye was the armchair in the corner. In it sat Mr. Archibald Playfair, his eyes wide open in frozen surprise, a single bullet hole clean through his temple. A silver cigarette case lay open on his lap, one cigarette half pulled from its case, his hand frozen mid-motion. No blood had spilled, not much. The bullet had done its job cleanly. Lady Eugenia let out a gasp, clutched her chest, and staggered backwards into the naval officer's arms. From outside, through the cracked library window, came that dreadful sound again, the hollow, ghostly moan of the phantom horn. Chapter 2. The First Clues. The storm-tossed sea beyond the cliffs was barely visible through the thick fog that clung to the windows of Windward House. Inside, the chill of the drawing-room had turned to a heavy stillness in the wake of Playfair's death. The guests had withdrawn to the morning-room at the insistence of Lady Eugenia, who, though pale and trembling, maintained her dignity behind a veil of aristocratic calm. Superintendent Lyle of the local constabulary had arrived by midnight, a tall man with grey whiskers and a habitual squint, as though the truth of the world required careful peering to detect. He surveyed the crime scene with practised weariness, assisted by Constable Reed, who took notes while casting furtive glances at the lifeless body in the corner chair. Death was swift, Lyle muttered, examining the neat entry wound. No sign of a struggle, no blood spray beyond the immediate vicinity, the shot likely fired from a close range, possibly point blank. Quiet weapon, silencer. Fawley, the butler, stood by the doorway, visibly rattled, though doing his utmost to appear composed. I was lighting the hearth in the east corridor when I heard a sound, a dull pop, like a champagne cork, Fawley said. Then the horn sounded again. It all happened within a minute. The horn. Lyle frowned. That cursed thing should have been dismantled with the lighthouse. You're certain you heard it? I am, sir. As were most in the house. Lyle turned to the window. What time did the guests arrive this evening? Shortly after 7, dinner was served at 8. And Mr. Playfair? He arrived last at 9:15. Was there any tension among the party? Fawley hesitated. My lady was somewhat agitated before dinner. She spent some time in the library alone. Mr. Playfair joined her there before the others arrived. They had a disagreement. What kind of disagreement? I wouldn't presume to know, sir, but voices were raised. Constable Reed made a note, while Lyle stepped toward the desk. It had been rifled. Papers, folders, ledgers. The safe behind the portrait of Lord Hargreaves still hung open, its contents disrupted. Lyle reached inside and removed a small, leather-bound journal. It bore no name, but was scrawled with figures, amounts, dates, initials. "Do you know what this is?" Lyle asked. Fawley's expression faltered. "I do not, sir." He was lying, but subtly. His shoulders stiffened a fraction too quickly. His eyes dropped for a second too long. Lyle made a mental note. Just then the door creaked open again, and Lady Eugenia stepped in, accompanied by Miss Iris Collingwood, her young secretary. Iris looked paler than usual, and her eyes flickered to Playfair's body before quickly turning away. Lady Eugenia, by contrast, carried herself like a woman who had endured a dozen funerals and grown bored of them. "Superintendent," she said in a low voice, "I shall do all I can to assist, though I must say this was a private gathering." "Quite so, my lady," said Lyle, bowing slightly. "But I must ask, was Mr. Playfair involved with anyone here in a financial or personal capacity?" A pause. Then she glanced at the desk. Mr. Playfair was a man whose dealings were far-reaching. He was not trusted by all who knew him, despite his charm. "You suspected him of wrongdoing?" "Wrongdoing?" She gave a hollow little laugh. "No, not exactly. But he had a talent for creating obligations, financial entrapment. I suspect many of tonight's guests knew that feeling." "Did he threaten you?" Her eyes narrowed. He was not in a position to. Lyle turned again to Iris. "Miss Collingwood, you're the secretary, I take it?" "Yes," she said, almost inaudibly. "You were here all evening?" "I was helping with the place settings until dinner, then serving drinks afterward in the drawing-room." "Did you see Mr. Playfair leave the room?" She nodded. "Just before 10, he stepped out, said something about fresh air. I thought he meant the balcony, but I didn't see where he went." "And you heard the horn?" A visible shiver passed over her. "Yes. It made me drop my teacup." Outside, the mist still wrapped the house like gauze. Inside, the weight of questions settled into every room. The guests remained in the morning room, casting nervous glances and whispering among themselves. The retired naval officer, Commander Doyle, sat stiffly with his arms crossed, as though resisting the temptation to take charge. Miss Tamsin Vale, the stage actress with a troubled past, paced like a tiger in a too-small cage. Mr. Edwin Welby, the critic, had poured himself another brandy and muttered about superstition. and Dr. Lennox, who had claimed to be in the lavatory during the gunshot, smoked with the air of someone who badly wanted not to be involved. Superintendent Lyle would have his hands full. But in the back of the room, unnoticed and quiet, another figure had arrived, a short, immaculately dressed man with a gleaming moustache, sharp eyes, and a tailored overcoat. He had entered without fanfare, nodding only briefly to the butler, who clearly recognized him. Forley stepped toward Lyle and murmured discreetly, "Sir, Mr. Hercule Poirot has arrived." Lyle turned, visibly startled. Poirot adjusted his gloves, gave a polite bow, and smiled. "Pardon, mes amis," he said gently, "but I could not help but overhear. I believe you have a very interesting case, no?" Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. Morning, the fog still hung over White Hollow like a drape of secrecy, refusing to lift even under the pale sunlight. Windward House, brooding on the cliff's edge, had grown sombre and still. The body of Archibald Playfair had been removed at first light, but the chill he left behind had settled into the bones of the house. In the drawing-room all the guests were summoned, at the gentle but unrelenting request of Hercule Poirot. The little Belgian had risen early and, with his usual fastidiousness, spent the morning examining the corridors, the library, and even stepping briefly onto the mist-drenched balcony to gaze toward the direction of the lighthouse. Now, as the clock struck 10, he stood with his hands clasped behind his back, the polished toes of his shoes turned outward at a slight angle, as though anchoring himself for psychological warfare. Superintendent Lyle, though initially wary, had ceded Poirot's reputation. He now leaned against the mantel, arms folded, watching with a faint expression of curiosity. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, "we are here because something terrible has occurred. A man has died, a man many of you may not have loved, perhaps not even liked, but nonetheless, his life was ended deliberately. This I do not doubt." The guests sat tensely in high-backed chairs and on the edge of tufted settees, forming an uneasy semicircle. Some avoided his gaze, others returned it with quiet defiance. "I propose we speak openly," Poirot continued. "We do not yet accuse, no, we inquired. I shall ask each of you to tell me where you were, what you saw, and what you heard, not merely the sounds of the gun or the horn, but the sounds of one another." Lady Eugenia, seated in a high-backed mahogany chair like a queen in mourning, gave a thin nod. "Let us begin, then, if you believe it will help." Poirot's eyes moved to Commander Doyle, his bearing still as upright as a naval statue. "Commander, if you please." Doyle cleared his throat. "I had just settled in with a glass of port in the smoking room, around 10 o'clock, I believe. Heard a peculiar pop. I thought it was the fireplace at first. Then the horn sounded." "You did not investigate?" "I rose to, but by the time I stepped into the corridor, Forley was already summoning Lady Eugenia, and I am no fool. Gunshots carry differently than other sounds. I knew what it likely was." Poirot gave a small nod, then turned to Miss Tamsin Vale. The actress wore a deep blue robe with a silk sash and a glinting brooch shaped like a seahorse. Her fingers fidgeted with a cigarette case she hadn't yet opened. "I was in the drawing-room," she said softly, "looking out at the fog. Or trying to, at least. I didn't see anything, just grey." "And your thoughts at the time?" Poirot asked delicately. She tilted her head. "I'd spoken to Archibald earlier. He said something cruel. He was always good at that, but I didn't think it mattered." "Cruel?" Poirot leaned forward slightly. "In what way?" She hesitated, her lips parting. Then she shrugged. "He brought up something from years ago. A man I once disappointed. He knew how to needle you until you bled." Poirot turned to Edwin Welby, the critic. "I was nursing a brandy in the morning room," Welby said, a little too quickly. "Didn't hear a thing until someone shouted. I was distracted by a particularly dreadful poem I'd been asked to review." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And your connection to Mr. Playfair?" Welby laughed bitterly. "We crossed paths once in London. He offered to fund a literary magazine, then withdrew it when I refused to print a certain review he liked. That was years ago. Yet you were invited here together. I suspect Eugenia was either playing matchmaker or trying to make one of us squirm." Poirot made no reply. He turned next to Dr. Lennox, a stooped man with kind eyes and a disconcerting habit of wringing his hands. "I was in the lavatory," Lennox said. "I heard nothing. Not the horn, not the gunshot." "Convenient," muttered Welby. "I suffer from nerves," Lennox replied coolly. "I'd excuse myself before dessert. If you wish, I can provide a statement of my condition." Poirot raised a hand. "That will not be necessary, Doctor, for now." Then his gaze shifted to Miss Iris Collingwood. She looked smaller now, withdrawn into herself. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a small notebook to her chest. "I was serving the drinks," she said quietly. "Then I stepped out into the hallway. I saw Mr. Playfair leave. He nodded to me. That was the last I saw of him." "You did not follow?" No. But you heard the horn?" "Yes, I think we all did." Poirot stepped back and surveyed the group. "One more question for all of you," he said. "Why did Lady Eugenia revive this tradition, this gathering, after 5 years? And why now?" A silence followed. Lady Eugenia looked up sharply. "That, Monsieur Poirot, is something you shall learn soon enough." Poirot gave a small bow. "But of course," he said softly, "all things in time." As he turned away, a curious gleam danced in his eye. Already he had observed what others missed. One guest had flinched at the mention of the horn. Another had lied without hesitation. And yet another had spoken too carefully, as though walking through a minefield of memories. The game had begun. Chapter 4. Poirot takes the measure. Windward House held its breath as Poirot moved through its dimly lit halls like a man reading a story written in shadows. The house, once grand, now seemed to sigh with age. The floorboards creaked at odd intervals, and the walls, adorned with naval portraits and faded sea charts, leaned slightly as if tired from decades of salt and wind. After the morning's formal questioning, the guests had scattered like leaves in a gust. Poirot, however, had remained behind in the drawing-room, seated in an overstuffed wing-back chair near the unlit fireplace, sipping a cup of bitterly strong coffee that he had personally requested from the butler. Superintendent Lyle entered quietly, watching Poirot for a moment before speaking. "You intend to stay, then?" Poirot looked up, smiling faintly. "Ah, mon ami, I do not travel all this way for a brief visit. I sense that this case is, how shall I put it, une affaire humaine, deeply human, not just a bullet in the head, but wounds of the heart, n'est-ce pas?" Lyell gave a non-committal grunt. "Playfair made enemies, that much is obvious, but I don't like the business with the horn." "Ah," Poirot sat forward. "It is the detail that sings, Superintendent. A horn that should not sound, and yet it does. That is not the detail of murder alone. It is the flourishing of theatre." "You think it was meant to frighten?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Or to misdirect?" They were interrupted by the arrival of Miss Iris Collingwood. She stood awkwardly in the doorway, a folder clutched to her chest. "Pardon me," she said. "Lady Eugenia asked me to retrieve Mr. Playfair's correspondence. I believe some of it is in the desk drawer here." Poirot rose with a gentle inclination of his head. "Of course, mademoiselle. "Allow me." He stepped aside, watching closely as she crossed the room. Her movements were cautious, but not from grief. It was fear. She knelt before the desk drawer, inserted a key from her necklace chain, and withdrew a bundle of envelopes bound with ribbon. Her hands trembled only slightly. "You knew him well, this Playfair?" Poirot asked mildly. "I worked with him, indirectly. He had dealings with Lady Eugenia, legal matters, trusts, financial holdings. I often typed letters for her." "Did you like him?" She paused, standing. "I respected his intelligence, but no, I did not like him." Poirot's tone softened. "And did he know something about you, perhaps?" Iris stiffened, then gave a sad smile. "He knew many things. Too many. He was the kind of man who found your secret without you speaking it." Poirot nodded. "Merci, mademoiselle. That is all for now." After she left, Poirot wandered into the library once more. The space was colder now, emptied of Playfair, yet somehow still heavy with his presence. The safe remained open, its hinges twisted. Poirot stood before it, frowning. It was not the damage that troubled him, it was the messiness. The disarray was too chaotic for someone like Playfair. A man so meticulous in dress and bearing would not tolerate a safe stuffed like a butcher's drawer. Unless... He leaned forward, scanning the papers that remained. Among scattered estate deeds and letters of credit, he found one oddity. A carbon copy of a letter addressed to a TD referencing the funds from the White Hollow lease, and silence regarding the incident of 1911, no signature. Poirot tucked the letter into his pocket with a murmur. Ah, a ghost from the past, perhaps. Footsteps approached. He turned to see Lady Eugenia herself entering the library, her posture rigid, her eyes alert. "You've begun early, Monsieur Poirot?" "Always, madame. The mind, like the sea, must not grow stagnant." She gave a faint smile. "You've read the letter, I assume?" "I have read many things. That one interests me." She stepped toward the window, her back to him. "Archibald found it last month. It was part of an old estate file from my husband's affairs. He found it intriguing. I found it dangerous." "Dangerous to whom?" She looked over her shoulder. "To the person who would be ruined if its contents were known." "Which is?" She turned fully now. "That, Monsieur Poirot, is why you are here. To find the answer, I dare not speak." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You knew someone might kill him?" She hesitated. "I feared it." "Yet you invited them all?" Her chin rose. "Because I also feared what he might do to them. I thought being here, surrounded by others, might dissuade him. Or at least buy time." Poirot sighed. "Murder is not dissuaded by company, only by the conscience." A pause, then Lady Eugenia said very softly, "Some of them, they were not meant to return here. White Hollow holds too many ghosts." Poirot bowed slightly. "Then let us hope I can lay at least one to rest." Outside, the fog began to lift, just slightly, enough to reveal the blackened shape of the distant lighthouse, standing sentinel at the edge of the rocks. The horn had not sounded again, but Poirot knew better than to trust silence. Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin. The morning fog finally began to break after noon, retreating from the headland like a tide in reverse. The sea below Windward House remained slate-grey and restless, but now the silhouette of the lighthouse stood clearly visible against the horizon, tall, grim, and silent. Inside the manor, Hercule Poirot had commandeered the morning room, a bright space with tall bay windows and a view of the cliffs. The furnishings had a faded elegance, lace curtains, mahogany chairs, and a vase of pale chrysanthemums that had begun to droop. Poirot had arranged a series of chairs in a semicircle, as if preparing for a theatrical audition. Superintendent Lyle sat quietly by the fire, notebook in hand, occasionally glancing at Poirot with the expression of a man both sceptical and curious. Poirot, seated cross-legged with gloved hands resting atop his cane, signalled for the first guest. Commander Reginald Doyle entered with military precision. His moustache bristled with irritation, his jaw squared with impatience. "You wish to question me again, Monsieur Poirot?" he asked, settling stiffly into the chair. Poirot nodded. "Only a conversation, mon commandant, not interrogation. We are all but travellers seeking truth, are we not?" "I prefer train schedules to riddles," Doyle muttered. "Ask your questions. Tell me about Mr. Playfair, your relationship." Doyle exhaled through his nose. "We served on a board together, some tiresome naval heritage trust. Archibald was charming, yes, but he was also a snake. Opportunistic. He had a way of making money out of thin air and convincing others it was their idea." "Did he cheat you?" "No," Doyle said too quickly. Then with a grunt, "He humiliated me once. Years ago, he learned of an indiscretion, nothing criminal, but enough to ruin my reputation. He hinted at it during a speech. A joke, you understand. No one else would have noticed. But I did. I never forgot." Poirot tilted his head. "And when the horn sounded, did it remind you of something?" Doyle stiffened. "A memory? Of a night during the war. A patrol ship grounded near a lighthouse. Fog just like this. We lost a man. I heard that same sound just before he vanished. I don't believe in ghosts, Poirot, but that horn chilled me." Poirot gave a thoughtful nod. "Merci, Commander." When Doyle left, Tamsin Vale entered next, sweeping in with the tired grace of a fading diva. Her eyes were sharp beneath layers of kohl, her lips stained with the faintest smudge of plum. "Darling Poirot," she said, settling with dramatic flair, "this house makes me feel like I've wandered onto a stage I never agreed to perform on. You knew Mr. Playfair well, I think?" She smiled ruefully. "Intimately. Once, briefly. I was young, foolish, and believed flattery meant love. He knew how to pull hearts like strings. You parted on bad terms. He offered me a role on condition I agree to, let's say, continue our arrangement. I refused. He saw to it the role went to someone else. I confronted him, told him never to speak to me again." "But you accepted Lady Eugenia's invitation?" "I'd buried the past, or so I thought. When I saw his name on the guest list, I nearly declined. But part of me wanted to face him again, perhaps to say what I never got to say." Poirot studied her closely. "Did you go near the library last night?" "I did. Just before 10. I was walking in the corridor. I saw Iris heading in the other direction. I thought I heard voices behind the door, but I didn't stop. I didn't want to see him." "Voices? Plural?" "Yes. His and someone else's. I couldn't tell who." Poirot made a note, then dismissed her with a nod. When the door closed, he tapped his gloved finger against his chin. "Interesting," he murmured. "Very interesting." Dr. Lennox came next. Thin, balding, his fingers perpetually folding and unfolding, he looked like a man caught in an eternal diagnosis of himself. "I won't pretend I was close to Archibald," he said. "We were once acquaintances. He invested in a clinic I consulted for, then withdrew his funds after certain results displeased him." "What sort of results?" Lennox hesitated. "A psychiatric trial? Confidential, I'm afraid." Poirot's eyes narrowed. Was this connected to the case of Henry Vale? Lennox's hand froze in mid-gesture. "How do you know that name?" Tamsin Vale's younger brother committed suicide in 1911, yes? A scandal hushed. Lennox swallowed. That's not relevant. But Playfair thought it was? He threatened to expose what happened. It would destroy Tamsin, and others. Poirot gave a slight bow of his head. Merci, Doctor. As Lennox departed, Poirot remained seated, lost in thought. Outside, the mist had finally broken enough to allow sunlight through the windows. A sliver of light caught on the brass end of his cane, glinting like a needle. Lyle looked up. You think the murder ties to that old case? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. I think the ghost of the lighthouse is not a ghost at all, and that the murder of Archibald Playfair began long before the bullet left the gun. Chapter 6. The First False Lead. By mid-afternoon, the atmosphere inside Windward House had shifted subtly. The fog may have lifted outside, but within, tensions had only thickened. Poirot's quiet but penetrating interviews had stirred memories best left buried, and suspicion now hung in the air like a curtain of smoke. Superintendent Lyle, watching from the wings, seemed to grow more convinced of one possible solution. He caught Poirot alone in the hallway near the old grandfather clock that ticked with ponderous finality. There's something we're overlooking, Lyle said, flipping open his notebook. The timeline. Iris Collingwood admits she saw Playfair heading down the corridor at 10. The gunshot, or what sounded like one, was heard at roughly 10:17. Plenty of time for someone to intercept him in the library. Poirot nodded, but said nothing. Lyle continued. Now Dr. Lennox said something that may change everything. He claims he saw Fawley the butler coming from the direction of the library at exactly 10:10, just before the horn sounded. Ah, said Poirot mildly. And what did Fawley say about his movements? Said he was in the east corridor, lighting the fire. But we found no sign of a fresh fire there. The hearth was cold. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And the motive? Lyle's tone darkened. Money. Playfair managed Lady Eugenia's investments. We found a cancelled cheque in the drawer of the butler's pantry, signed by Playfair, payable to Fawley, dated last month. £500, rather a large sum for a servant. We? Poirot murmured. Quite a gift. Lyle crossed his arms. Blackmail, I suspect. Perhaps Fawley knew something about Lady Eugenia, or the others. Playfair might have decided to cut him off. Then the horn? Simple, Lyle replied. A distraction, draws everyone's attention, adds a layer of confusion. With that racket echoing, a silenced shot wouldn't be noticed. Poirot turned, gazing out a window toward the lighthouse. It is plausible. Plausible? Lyle echoed, slightly irritated. Poirot, the man lied about where he was. He had motive and opportunity. He knew the house intimately. Shall I arrest him? No, Poirot said gently. Not yet. But, Poirot turned, his eyes gleaming. When you have eliminated the impossible, yes, what remains must be the truth. But you see, Superintendent, you have not yet eliminated enough. Meanwhile, in the servants' quarters, Fawley sat on the edge of his narrow cot, shoulders hunched, the knuckles of his hands pressed together. Poirot entered alone, his footfalls soft against the flagstone. I understand you are under suspicion, monsieur, Poirot began, sitting without invitation. Fawley glanced up, his voice flat. I've nothing to hide. You accepted money from Mr. Playfair, £500. That is not nothing. I earned it, Fawley replied. I was asked to retrieve certain documents from Lady Eugenia's personal files and deliver them to Mr. Playfair without her knowledge. Poirot arched an eyebrow. Ah, and did you? I did. Letters, correspondence, financial notes. I didn't read them. But you knew their worth, I suspected, but he paid well and asked no questions. Poirot leaned forward. Did you know what Playfair intended to do with them? Forley's voice dropped. He was planning something. I think he meant to destroy her. Socially? Financially? He resented her. She cut him out of something years ago. Land inheritance, I think. It was personal. Were you in the East Corridor last night? Yes. But not lighting the fire. His jaw tightened. I was following him. I thought if I caught him with those papers, I could stop whatever he was planning. And he went into the library. I waited. Then the horn sounded and I panicked. I thought something was about to happen. I ran the long way around to the West Wing. Then Forley the coward, yes, that's what they'll say. No, monsieur, Poirot said softly. Cowards do not confess this freely. Forley looked up, eyes sunken. I didn't kill him. Poirot studied him a moment longer, then rose. I believe you. As he returned upstairs, Poirot passed the tall mirror in the corridor and paused. He looked at himself, not with vanity, but with consideration, as if trying to see beyond the reflection. The pieces did not yet fit. The horn, the forged path to the safe, the whispers of the past, and Playfair, so precise in life, left murdered amid chaos. It was too untidy. Later that evening, the guests reconvened for a strained dinner. The table was quieter now, forks clinked, wine was sipped but not savoured. Conversation was clipped, full of sidelong glances and half-finished thought. Poirot watched them all, every tick, every pause, every sigh. He caught it, a twitch in Iris's hand when the word "safe" was mentioned, a frown that passed over Tamsin's face when Lennox complimented the wine, a glance too long between Lady Eugenia and Commander Doyle, and most of all, a momentary silence when someone asked casually, "Who knew how to operate the old lighthouse horn?" Nobody answered, which in Poirot's mind meant someone did, and that someone hoped the answer would remain lost in the fog. Chapter 7. The Psychological Game. The next morning dawned clear, but Windward House remained cloaked in something far thicker than fog, mistrust. The air inside was sharp with suppressed tension, and even the click of a teacup seemed amplified. Poirot, ever immaculate, had taken his breakfast in solitude in the conservatory, watching sunlight spill over the treetops, his mind dancing with shadows. He had not slept. Not truly. Instead, he had spent much of the night reviewing his mental inventory of the guests, their contradictions, their grief, their silences. Each had their secret, but only one had killed Archibald Playfair. It was time, he decided, to begin turning the screws. In the drawing-room, Poirot invited Tamsin Vale to sit with him for a conversation of no consequence. She obliged with theatrical grace, folding herself onto the divan like a cat who knew the power of her presence. "You were once engaged, mademoiselle, were you not?" he began lightly. Her eyes sparkled with guarded amusement. "Once? I've been engaged 3 times, monsieur, but only once to a man who never lived long enough to marry me." "Henry Vale." The sparkle dimmed. "Yes." "Tell me about him." She was silent for a beat too long. Then, he was brilliant, sensitive. He could recite Rimbaud from memory, but forgot to wear matching shoes. I adored him. "But something happened." She stiffened. "He killed himself. That's all that was ever said." "And yet," Playfair knew more. Her expression faltered. "I think," Poirot continued gently, "he knew enough to wound you, to threaten you. Perhaps he discovered something buried, a diagnosis, a letter, a treatment gone wrong." Her hands clenched. Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, mademoiselle, did Dr. Lennox treat your brother?" Tamsin's breath caught. Then she whispered, "Yes, He did. Henry had episodes, night terrors. He heard voices. Dr. Lennox was recommended by a friend. It was supposed to help. But something went wrong. There was a trial, she said. New treatments. Henry trusted him. Then one night, he walked into the sea. Poirot said nothing. The silence was permission. Playfair knew, she continued. He had letters. I don't know how. He said he would expose the truth behind the theatrical tragedy. He meant to destroy me. Poirot nodded slowly. Did you kill him, mademoiselle? She looked up, and for a moment there was steel beneath the velvet. Number, but I considered it. Next, Poirot invited Dr. Lennox. The doctor sat stiffly, eyes wary. Do you think your treatment led to Henry Vale's death? Poirot asked bluntly. Lennox's face paled. I don't know. It's haunted me. Playfair used it against you. He threatened to publish, said he'd name me in a scandalous exposé, claimed he had a journalist ready, and I begged him to reconsider. I even offered money. He laughed. Poirot's gaze sharpened. You spoke with him in the library last night, didn't you? A pause. Yes, briefly. You were the second voice Miss Vale heard. Yes. And when you left, he was alive. I swear it. Poirot studied him for a moment, then offered a faint nod. You may go. By mid-morning, Poirot gathered all the guests in the morning room again. They entered reluctantly, one by one, like players uncertain of their lines. Commander Doyle lingered near the fireplace. Iris Collingwood sat by the window, her hands knotted in her lap. Lady Eugenia stood with arms folded, chin high. Tamsin and Lennox sat apart. Welby hovered awkwardly near the door. Poirot stood at the centre, like a conductor before a nervous orchestra. I ask only that you listen, he said, for the mind of Hercule Poirot is beginning to glimpse the picture beneath the dust. He turned to Iris. You saw Mr. Playfair leave the drawing-room at 10, yes? And then? She hesitated. He walked down the hall toward the library. And you went where? She glanced at Lady Eugenia, then lowered her eyes. To her study. I was asked to bring her reading glasses. Which she never received, Lady Eugenia said, archly. I got distracted, Iris whispered. Poirot's voice remained gentle. You heard voices outside the library? She looked up quickly. Yes, but I didn't stay. I thought they were arguing. And you heard the horn? Yes, I was in the corridor when it sounded. It made me drop the tray. Poirot turned to the group. You see, mes amis, the horn. It was no ghostly cry. It was planned, timed. It was not merely a distraction. It was a trigger. A trigger? Doyle frowned. An auditory signal, a psychological cue. Lennox blanched. Hypnosis? Number simpler. A warning to one person alone, a message. Now. Do it now. Poirot paced slowly. Someone used the horn to cover the gunshot, but also to control the moment. It was not spontaneous, it was engineered. Silence settled over the room like dust on forgotten furniture. Poirot's voice dropped to a near whisper. And I believe the person who heard that signal knew precisely what it meant. His eyes scanned them all, every flinch, every breath, every drop of sweat. The true unravelling, he knew, was not far away. Chapter 8. A secondary mystery. The wind shifted by noon, bringing with it the salt-laced breath of the sea and stirring the trees around Windward House into uneasy motion. Inside, Poirot sat in the library, the very room where Archibald Playfair had met his end, examining the crime scene once more, not with the eyes of a policeman, but with the subtle vision of a psychologist. Something had been nagging at him. It was not merely who had fired the bullet, it was when and why, yes, but also what Playfair had truly discovered. For all the guests feared what he knew about them, Poirot had the impression that Playfair had only just uncovered something even deeper, something none of them suspected. A second mystery hiding behind the first. He stood before the bookshelf and traced his fingers over the spines. Then he paused. There was a gap, small but deliberate, between two heavy tomes on naval engineering. Poirot reached in and pressed gently. A soft click broke the silence. One panel of the bookshelf inched forward. Behind it was a small compartment, crudely constructed, its paint faded from time and salt. Inside, a single, yellowed envelope, unsealed. Poirot removed it, opened the flap, and read the typewritten letter. Then his eyes narrowed. Later that afternoon, he found Iris Collingwood alone in the music room, softly playing a Brahms nocturne on the grand piano. The music stopped abruptly when she noticed his presence. "You startled me." "I often do, mademoiselle. It is part of my charm." She smiled weakly. Poirot took a seat beside her. "Tell me, Miss Collingwood, you were Mr. Playfair's secretary for how long?" 3 years. "And you travelled often together?" "Yes. Geneva, Lisbon, Vienna, mostly dull conferences." "You found him difficult?" She hesitated. "Demanding, impatient, but brilliant. He was always observing, writing things down in that dreadful leather notebook." "Did he ever share the nature of his work with you?" She paused. "He said he was writing a book, a kind of exposé. But it changed. Recently, he became more secretive. He kept saying, 'The truth hides in old stones.' I thought he was being dramatic." "Did you believe he feared someone would stop him?" Iris frowned. "Yes, actually. Last week he said strange things like he was watching his back, but I never imagined—" Poirot nodded. "What if I told you Mr. Playfair discovered something hidden here in Windward House, not just about you or the others, but something long buried, a truth meant never to be unearthed?" She blinked. "Something here?" "Oui, mademoiselle, and that something, I believe, is the key to all this." He rose, offering a thin, knowing smile. "You have been most helpful." "Thank you." Poirot next called upon Lady Eugenia, who was pacing her bedroom like a caged panther. The curtains were drawn against the sun, and her fingers were tightly wrapped around a glass of sherry. "Must we continue this charade, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked, her voice brittle. "Surely you know who killed him?" "I know many things," he said mildly, "but I do not act until I am certain." She turned to him suddenly. "You think this house has a secret? Something more than scandal, you're right. But I've protected it for years, and I will not allow it to be sullied now." "Madame, may I ask, did Archibald Playfair come to you recently with a proposition?" She said nothing. "He found a letter," Poirot said quietly, "one that refers to a man named Edward Crane." That name struck her like a slap. "My husband's associate," she said, almost spitting the word. "A mistake. One that should have remained in the past." Yet Playfair found evidence that Edward Crane was not merely an associate. He was your husband's half-brother, illegitimate, disinherited. "By my insistence," she snapped. "The man was unstable, a criminal mind, dangerous." Poirot's voice softened, but he did not go quietly. Her silence was enough. He continued, "The letter I found, hidden behind the bookshelf, was written by Lord Hargreaves himself. A confession of sorts. He admits to bribing the local authorities to cover up a disappearance." Eugenia's hand trembled. "Crane," she whispered. Poirot nodded. Playfair must have found this compartment days ago. He was planning to reveal the scandal, perhaps not in public, yet. But someone panicked. Someone realized that once this truth came out, Windward House would no longer be a sanctuary. It would be a grave. Lady Eugenia's voice cracked. I built this life to forget all that. My husband, he did what he did to protect our name. Then someone here, Poirot said, did what they did to protect the silence. Later that night, Poirot returned to the drawing room, where the storm had finally begun to gather over the sea. Rain peppered the windows, and thunder growled over the cliffs. He looked around at the furniture, the chessboard still set from the first night, and the whiskey decanter untouched since the murder. Everything was in place, but nothing as it seemed. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small leather notebook, the one found hidden in Archibald Playfair's suitcase. He opened it to the final page, where a line had been scribbled hastily in red ink. They buried more than a man. They buried the truth. Poirot closed the book slowly. Tomorrow he will gather the guests one final time and reveal the entire terrible picture. Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm. Rain swept across the cliffs in long diagonal sheets, smudging the windows of Windward House with blurred streaks of grey. Thunder rumbled like distant cannon fire as the guests assembled in the drawing room, called together by Poirot's quiet but commanding request. No one spoke at first. Even the flamboyant Lydia Vale was subdued. The theatre drained from her as she stared out into the foggy expanse. Commander Willoughby stood by the fire, jaw set, arms folded, like a man awaiting a military verdict. Lady Eugenia sat rigidly in her armchair, her fingers clasped tightly around a porcelain teacup that had long since gone cold. Poirot stood in the centre of the room, his small frame as still as a chessmaster, before the final move. "I thank you for your presence, mes amis," he began, "though I imagine you suspected this moment was inevitable." The grandfather clock ticked behind him. Lightning flashed faintly across the coastline. "It is a peculiar thing," Poirot continued, "to investigate not only a death, but the ripples of its meaning. For when a man is murdered, we often look to the how and the who, but in this case, no, we must consider why the truth itself provoked such fear." He glanced at Lady Eugenia, who looked away. "You see," Poirot said, pacing slowly, "Archibald Playfair was not merely a man of finance or gossip. He was a collector of buried truths. And Windward House, this proud, beautiful fortress on the cliff, holds more buried truth than any of us suspected." He held up the letter from the hidden compartment. "This, written by Lord Hargreaves, proves that a man named Edward Crane once lived under this roof, a man exiled from the family, disinherited, and eventually disappeared." He looked around. "And not quietly, number the letter alludes to a bribe paid to the constabulary. It also refers to a key hidden beneath the lighthouse, a phrase repeated again in Playfair's notebook." Willoughby stirred. "Surely you're not suggesting Crane was murdered here?" "I suggest nothing yet, mon capitaine. I merely follow the footprints." Poirot turned to Iris. "Mademoiselle Collingwood, you said Mr. Playfair muttered strange things about old stones and hidden voices." She nodded, hesitant. "He seemed obsessed with the lighthouse the last 2 days. He even tried to have the key copied to its padlocked entrance, but the locksmith in town refused without Lady Eugenia's permission." Poirot's eyes shifted back to Eugenia. "And what might one find inside that lighthouse now, madam, aside from a horn that was supposedly decommissioned 15 years ago?" Lydia Vale let out a short, sharp gasp. "Then that sound was real?" she asked. "Not a trick of the fog?" "Oh, it was real, madame," Poirot said softly. "And timed. Just before the murder, the horn was heard. But how could that be unless someone knew precisely how to activate it?" someone who had access, or perhaps still possesses a key. Eugenia's cup clattered softly against its saucer. "What exactly are you implying, Monsieur Poirot?" "I imply that Archibald Playfair was silenced," Poirot said, "because the truth he uncovered threatened to unbury the house's darkest secret, and someone here, someone who feared that resurrection, acted first." A long silence followed. Finally, Willoughby growled, "With respect, Poirot, we've all had our secrets dug up by that man. Any one of us had a cause?" Poirot turned calmly toward him. "Yes, and yet the manner of the crime was not that of a man caught in passion. It was clinical, precise. The bullet entered just above the temple, close range, no struggle, no raised voice, no call for help. Mr. Playfair likely trusted his killer." His gaze swept the room. "I now believe Mr. Playfair summoned someone to the library that evening. He had found something, the letter, and meant to leverage it. Perhaps he intended blackmail, or perhaps merely exposure, but the moment was planned. Only, the reaction was not what he expected." Lightning lit the windows again. The storm seemed to lean against the house. Poirot reached into his coat pocket and withdrew Playfair's notebook once more. In his final entry, he wrote something most curious. "They buried more than a man. They buried the truth." He looked at each guest in turn. "That truth is what I intend to express tomorrow. I have requested Inspector Masson to join us from the mainland. He will arrive with men and tools, enough to open the lighthouse and whatever lies beneath it." A faint, sharp inhalation escaped Lady Eugenia, and though she tried to compose herself, her trembling fingers betrayed her. Poirot said nothing more. He merely turned, folded his hands behind his back, and walked to the window. The others followed his gaze. Far out on the cliff, shrouded in rain and mist, stood the old lighthouse, tall, mute, and waiting. Chapter 10. The Lighthouse Key. The morning broke not with sunlight, but a milky grey wash that turned the coastline to a painter's blur. The sea below still roared, though the wind had softened. The fog clung to the cliffs, reluctant to disperse, as if it too had secrets it wished to conceal. By the time Inspector Masson's motor-car rattled up the pebbled drive, Windward House was already awake. Poirot had risen early, immaculately dressed, his moustaches pristine despite the salt-laden air. He greeted the inspector with a polite nod. "Merci for your promptness, Inspector," he said. Masson, a broad, weathered man with the complexion of sunburnt oak, climbed out stiffly, casting a glance at the looming lighthouse just visible through the haze. "You've stirred up quite a nest here, Monsieur Poirot. The village is buzzing. Someone claims they heard the horn again at dawn." "I'm not surprised," Poirot said softly. "Come. There is much to see." They walked together to the cliffs, Poirot explaining as they went. The murder of Archibald Playfair, the forced safe, the hidden letter, and the suspicion of long-buried truths surrounding Edward Crane. At the base of the lighthouse, Masson produced a heavy iron key, handed over by Lady Eugenia under visible protest. A constable trailed behind, them bearing a crowbar just in case. Poirot turned the key, the door groaned as it opened, the scent within stale and metallic. Rust clung to every rail, every bolt. The interior was narrow, claustrophobic, a tight coil of steps leading upwards. But Poirot, after a brief glance, did not ascend. "No, we go down," Masson raised a brow. "Down!" Poirot pointed to the floor. "Do you see this, Inspector? The scuff marks along the planks. There is a hatch here. The edges have been disturbed recently." Masson knelt and ran a hand along the wood. "You're right." He motioned to the constable. "Crowbar." The hatch creaked open reluctantly, revealing a dark recess below, no more than a crawl space. The scent that wafted up was different, older, damp, like earth, and mildew. A rickety wooden ladder descended into shadow. Poirot, ever precise, lit a torch. "Shall we?" He went first, descending carefully. The space below was narrow, its walls stone-lined, dripping slightly from the morning dew. They found themselves in a crude underground room, a storeroom, or perhaps once a storm shelter. But now it was empty, save for a single object in the centre. A trunk. Old, iron-bound, its lid split slightly as though someone had once tried to open it, and then stopped. Masson approached it warily. "It's padlocked." Poirot examined the rusted latch. "Recently disturbed. See how the dust is brushed away?" Masson took the crowbar and cracked the old lock with a pop. Poirot exhaled slowly. "Bon, now let us see what ghost Mr. Playfair was about to summon." The trunk creaked open. Inside lay folded garments, old, moth-eaten coats, wool trousers, a pair of cracked boots, and beneath them, bones. A human skeleton, partially disassembled from age and disuse, but unmistakably real. Curled at the bottom, arms drawn tight to the chest, as if whoever it was had been forced into the trunk, alive. Masson let out a sharp breath. "Dear God!" Poirot knelt, reverent, his eyes scanning the interior. "The skull was fractured, see here, and this coat bears initials, E.C., Edward Crane." Poirot nodded slowly. "So it is true he was not exiled, not in the conventional sense. He was murdered and hidden away beneath the very place that symbolized his disgrace, the Lighthouse." Masson stood upright, lips pressed into a grim line. "This isn't just murder. This is cold, calculated disposal. He was meant never to be found." Poirot's eyes grew distant, and yet Playfair found the clues, or perhaps he was told part of it, enough to dig. They returned to the house with the grim news. Poirot insisted the others gather again in the drawing-room. When they entered, Lady Eugenia, Lydia Vale, Willoughby, Iris, he watched them closely, noting the stiff movements, the darting eyes. "I regret to inform you," he said quietly, "that we have discovered the remains of a man buried beneath the lighthouse." Lady Eugenia stiffened. Lydia pressed a hand to her lips. Willoughby stared. "It is Edward Crane," Poirot continued, voice even. "There is no doubt now. Murdered, hidden away like some inconvenient shame." Lady Eugenia rose. Her face was white, her body trembling, but her voice was resolute. "I did not kill him." Poirot did not flinch. "But you knew?" A silence stretched, taut as wire. She turned slowly toward the fireplace. "Edward was my brother-in-law, my husband's younger brother. He was erratic, brilliant, but unstable. He embarrassed the family. He gambled, drank. There were incidents. My husband had him committed once." "And yet," Poirot said gently, "he came back." She nodded. "Yes, uninvited. I was alone that night. My husband had gone to London. Edward came back, raving, furious. He claimed he had a right to the family name, to the inheritance. I tried to reason with him." Her voice broke. "Then I heard a struggle. Fawley, our butler, then younger, he intervened. There was a fall. Edward struck his head. He was bleeding, not moving. We panicked." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You and Fawley hid the body?" "I begged him," she whispered. "It was an accident, but the scandal, it would have ruined everything." Willoughby's face darkened. "And Archibald Playfair found out?" She nodded faintly. "I believe so. I think he meant to force the truth. Not just about Edward, but about all of us." Poirot said nothing for a long moment. Then he stepped forward, eyes calm and unreadable. There is still one piece missing, madame, because Playfair died, not from your shame, but from someone else's fear. He looked toward Lydia, then Willoughby, then Iris. Tomorrow, he said, I shall name the killer. And he turned, leaving silence in his wake. Chapter 11. The motive beneath the waves. The sea was calm that morning, unnervingly so. The lighthouse, now devoid of secrets, loomed silent over the cliff like a remorseful sentinel. Within Windward House, the air was thick with unsaid words. Breakfast was a perfunctory affair. No appetite, only ritual. Even the toast was left untouched. Hercule Poirot stood at the window of the drawing-room, hands behind his back, staring out to the ocean. His reflection in the glass watched him back, sharp, alert, unreadable. At precisely 9 o'clock he summoned the guests again, as promised. Lady Eugenia arrived first, veiled and ashen. She had not denied her part in the cover-up of Edward Crane's death, but she claimed ignorance of the murder of Archibald Playfair. Lydia Vale came next, clutching her notebook tightly, eyes swollen but determined. Willoughby followed, dour and tense. Iris entered last, quiet as a whisper. Inspector Masson stood near the fireplace, arms folded, observing everyone. Poirot addressed them. "We are very near the end now," he said softly. "Last night, a man was murdered. Years ago, another was hidden, his death disguised, his memory expunged. Both crimes stem from the same poisonous root, fear, not of violence, but of revelation." He turned to Lady Eugenia. "You wished to preserve the family legacy. You chose silence." She didn't respond. Poirot's voice turned brisk. "Let us examine the motive. Monsieur Playfair discovered something. Perhaps he found the journal Iris had hidden away, containing notes about Edward Crane's final days. Or perhaps he had already guessed that Edward did not vanish of his own accord." Iris stirred. "I didn't think anyone would ever see it." Poirot inclined his head. "And yet you kept it. Guilt, mademoiselle? Or affection?" Iris swallowed hard. "He was kind to me once. Edward, he told me stories about the lighthouse, about how the horn would cry when the sea was angry. He wasn't mad, just lonely." Poirot's eyes warmed momentarily. Then it turned cool once more. "And that horn, it sounded again on the night of the murder. Not supernatural, non-mechanical. Someone reactivated it. Why? To draw attention? Or perhaps as a warning?" He turned to Willoughby. "You served in the Navy. You would know how to operate such a device." Willoughby bristled. "Are you accusing me?" "Not yet, mon ami, but let us not forget. Playfair's murder was not a crime of impulse. It was meticulous, clean. He was shot once, no signs of struggle, likely drugged beforehand. That suggests calculation. Someone who wanted to silence him, yes, but also someone who understood how to stage silence." Poirot stepped lightly across the carpet to Lydia. "Mademoiselle Vale, you were close to Mr. Playfair, no? You admitted you followed him to the library that evening." Lydia straightened. "Yes, I did. I saw him opening the safe. I didn't know he would die. You said he had secrets about others in this house. What did he know about you?" A silence. Lydia's hand tightened on the notebook. He knew my father." "Ah," Poirot said gently. "At last we arrive." She looked down. "My father worked for the Hargreaves family. He was the estate manager before Fawley. He was dismissed under suspicion of theft. But he claimed it was a set-up, that Edward Crane tried to help him, tried to reveal the truth, then Edward vanished." "And so Playfair used that knowledge against you?" Poirot asked. Lydia nodded. "He threatened to expose it, said it would destroy my name. I didn't kill him, Monsieur Poirot. I hated him, yes, but I wouldn't kill." Poirot studied her for a long moment, then turned to Masson. "Inspector, I ask you to consider this. A man is found dead in a locked room. No signs of forced entry. The weapon was not recovered. Yet the method, the single, silent shot, the undisturbed positioning, suggests premeditation. Playfair was lured. Masson frowned. So it wasn't any of them? Who then? Poirot smiled faintly. Mon ami, I never said it was none of them. He turned slowly toward the door. Forley, he called, please join us. The old butler entered, stiff, eyes hollow. Poirot's voice softened. You were the last to see Edward Crane alive. It was you who helped hide the body, but I believe you were also the first to hear the horn sound again, and you understood what it meant. Forley didn't speak. Poirot stepped closer. Playfair discovered your secret. He had letters, perhaps even photographs, proof that Edward had come to you for help that night, and that you refused him. When Edward died, you obeyed Lady Eugenia, yes, but it was your hands that placed the body in the trunk. A tremble passed through Forley's face. Poirot's voice turned steel. When Playfair confronted you, you begged him to remain silent, but he mocked you, and so you waited. You prepared. You invited him to the library, offered him a drink, laced. You shot him cleanly, quietly. Then, to deflect suspicion, you reopened the horn. Forley's shoulders slumped. He looked up, eyes watery. I didn't mean to kill him, he said hoarsely. He was a snake. He smiled as he tore open the past, said I was the coward, the accomplice, that I belonged in the trunk with Edward. Poirot nodded gravely. I do not excuse it, monsieur, but I understand. Forley was taken into custody. Lady Eugenia sat motionless, her world now stripped of its veils. Poirot turned to the rest. The phantom horn is silenced, but what it summoned was the truth, and truth, mes amis, is louder than any storm. Chapter 12. The Light Revealed. A day had passed since Forley's quiet confession. Windward House had returned to its familiar silence, though now it was a silence stripped of secrecy. The fog had lifted from both the sea and the soul of the place, revealing jagged truths that for years had been cloaked in loyalty, guilt, and shadows. Poirot sat in the morning room, a cup of thick black coffee before him, and a crisp linen napkin folded neatly in his lap. Inspector Masson joined him with a rustle of paperwork and a weary expression. We've taken Forley in, he said. He made a full statement. Said he'd kept the letters Playfair sent him, copies of Edward Crane's journal entries mostly. Damning things. The man was blackmailing everyone, one way or another. Poirot nodded slowly. Oui, Monsieur Playfair was a man who trafficked not in finance, as he liked to claim, but in fear. Each of you had secrets, and he, like a clever parasite, fed off them. Masson took a long sip of tea. I must admit I was convinced it was Lady Eugenia, or even that timid secretary. But the butler? Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, the English always underestimate the butler, but murder, mon ami, is not about role. It is about pressure. And Forley lived with the unbearable burden of having aided in the disposal of Edward Crane. When that guilt was weaponized against him, he saw no escape. Masson looked thoughtful. Do you believe he acted alone? Poirot's eyes sparkled slightly. Ah, now we ask the delicate question. He pulled the trigger, yes. But was he entirely without influence? Let us not forget that in these grand houses, silence is often a form of complicity. Before Masson could respond, the door opened. Lady Eugenia entered with her usual grace, though she seemed older now, as if truth had added a decade to her face. I trust the investigation is complete? She asked, voice calm but brittle. Poirot stood and bowed slightly. It is, madame, Forley has confessed to the murder of Mr. Playfair, but there are residual matters." She sat across from him, smoothing her gloves. "Yes, I thought as much." "You ordered the concealment of Edward Crane's death," Poirot said plainly. "I did," she replied without hesitation. "He fell, accidentally, I believe. He had been raving for days, terrifying the staff. When it happened, I acted to protect my family." Poirot regarded her carefully. "And now?" She gave a small, sad smile. "Now I see that protecting the family sometimes means facing its ghosts." A silence passed. Poirot inclined his head. "A noble reflection, madame. I shall not press the matter further. Your fate lies more with history than with the courts." Eugenia gave a gracious nod and stood. "Merci, Monsieur Poirot. You have done what no one else could. You have turned on the light." She left the room with quiet dignity. Later that afternoon, Poirot wandered to the lighthouse, now fully opened for investigation. The horn mechanism was still functional, if antiquated, a system of pressurized air chambers and levers. He studied it briefly, then moved to the top of the spiral staircase. From there the view was magnificent. The sea shimmered in every direction, and Windward House sat like a relic behind him, beautiful, solemn, haunted. He was joined by Iris, the quiet secretary. "I thought I might find you here," she said, stepping lightly beside him. He gave her a small smile. "You are fond of this place?" She nodded. "I used to come here as a child. Edward would bring me when he was allowed out. It was the only place where he was truly calm." Poirot looked out to sea. "He was not mad, you know." "I know," she said, "just broken and lonely." Poirot studied her face for a moment. "You were the one who placed his journal in the safe, yes?" Iris hesitated, then nodded. "I didn't mean to start anything, but when Playfair found it, everything unravelled." Poirot patted her hand gently. "Sometimes the truth must be shaken loose from the past, mademoiselle, like dust from old drapes." She smiled faintly. "What happens now?" "Now?" Poirot looked back toward the house. "Now the house will be remembered, but perhaps also it will begin to forget. A new beginning, shaped not by secrets but by what was revealed." They stood together in silence for a while. A gull wheeled overhead. The lighthouse, mute once more, stood tall against the endless blue, and so the phantom horn, instrument of fear, warning, and ultimately revelation, was silenced for good. Chapter 13. Echoes After Midnight. The fog had retreated days ago, yet in Windward House it lingered in quieter ways, in the half-finished sentences at dinner, in the echoing corridors that once carried secrets like whispers in the wind. With the case all but resolved and Forley remanded into custody, a strange stillness had settled, not relief, something quieter, more contemplative. Poirot remained a few days longer. He took his breakfasts on the terrace and his evenings in the library, often thumbing through old estate ledgers or pausing to examine one of the many oil portraits hung with reverence and dust. As he told Lady Eugenia, a mystery is like a garden. Once you prune the deadwood, one must wait to see what begins to grow. It was on the third evening after the arrest that something curious happened. Poirot was in the drawing-room, quietly reading a book on maritime history, when a peculiar sound drifted up through the open windows. Not the horn, not this time, but a rhythmic tapping, deliberate and strangely hypnotic. It came from the direction of the conservatory. Poirot, ever alert, set down his book and rose silently. Crossing the corridor with measured steps, he paused at the conservatory door. There she was, Iris Langley, seated at the old writing desk tucked near the orchids. She hadn't noticed him yet. Her fingers moved quickly, not over a typewriter, but across pages of an age journal. the same journal that had once belonged to Edward Crane. Poirot watched for a moment before stepping inside. "Forgive the interruption, mademoiselle," he said gently. "I did not know the journal had been returned to you." Iris startled, but only slightly. "They released it from evidence this morning." I asked Inspector Masson. Poirot inclined his head. "And you find comfort in it?" "I find truth," she replied, running a hand across the leather cover. Edward was unstable, yes, but not dangerous. He was lucid enough to know who was pulling his strings. "There are entries here, ones no one reads. They speak of someone else, someone who visited him in secret." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Indeed?" She turned the book towards him and pointed to a passage, her voice low. "He writes, 'I am not mad, I know what I heard. The horn is their signal. The woman comes when it sounds. She knows the way through the tunnels beneath the cliffs. She said I must keep quiet, that they'd all be sorry otherwise.'" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "A woman? That was not in the earlier pages you brought to light." "No," she said quietly. "Because those pages were torn out, I found them folded in the back, hidden behind the lining." Poirot took the journal and examined the parchment. The ink was aged, the handwriting unmistakably Crane's, but what stood out was the mention of tunnels. His mind ticked over. "Iris," he said slowly, "was the lighthouse ever connected to the house by way of underground passage? Something perhaps built for wartime purposes?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I remember Forley saying once that during the war, smuggling routes had been reinforced. But no one speaks of them now." Poirot was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled faintly. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have provided me with the last piece of the puzzle." Iris looked at him, startled. "You mean the case isn't solved?" Poirot gently closed the journal. "Oh, the murderer of Archibald Playfair sits in a cell, but there is more. There is the reason the horn sounded again after 15 years. There is the question of who truly controlled the narrative, even after death." He looked toward the dark window, where the sea breathed against the shore like a patient beast. "I must return to the lighthouse. One final time." Chapter 14. The Secret. Beneath the sea, Poirot returned to the lighthouse alone. Dusk had settled along the horizon in streaks of indigo and bronze, the waves glinting like coins scattered from a giant's hand. The structure loomed quietly as he approached, no longer threatening, only ancient, weary, and enigmatic. A stiff breeze rolled off the water, tousling his coat as he stepped through the narrow doorway with a flick of his flashlight. Inside, the air was cool and tinged with salt. He descended past the rusted horn mechanism and the lantern chamber, heading down toward the base where old storage rooms once lay. This time, however, his attention turned to the flagged floor. With a careful sweep of his light, he found what he was seeking, a grate half covered by oilcloth and debris. He bent, fingers brushing away grit, and saw the outline of a hinged panel. "Très bien," he murmured. A crowbar from the wall mount made short work of the rusted seal. With a groan, the trapdoor gave way to reveal stone steps winding downward, swallowed by darkness and damp. Poirot descended slowly. The smell hit him first: earth, mildew, sea brine, and something older. The tunnel was narrow but expertly constructed. Walls of local stone arched above him, reinforced with timber. Whoever had built this had intended it to last. After nearly 10 minutes of walking, the passage widened into a small chamber. Here the remnants of occupation were clear. Old lanterns, crates marked with faded naval insignia, even a rusted rifle against the wall. But what drew Poirot's eye was the more recent detritus: a flashlight, a pair of rubber boots and a folded oilskin coat. All clean, all modern. Someone had been here recently. He turned as a whisper echoed behind him. Then a voice, measured, female, and calm. "I should have known it would be you, Monsieur Poirot." Emerging from the shadows was Miss Tamsin White, the elegant house archivist, her face composed yet curiously empty of surprise. Her gloved hands held a small revolver, pointed at the floor. "Ah," Poirot said softly, "so it is you who visited Edward Crane in the attic, the woman from the tunnels." She nodded, not denying it. "I was the only one he trusted. The others pitied him, feared him. I listened." Poirot stepped carefully to the side, studying her face. "And you manipulated him. Told him he must remain quiet, that there would be consequences." "He was too fragile," she said, "and too valuable. He remembered everything, names, details." "Dates." Poirot's voice was cool now. "Which you used, passed to Playfair, perhaps? Or did you keep the secrets for yourself?" Tamsin smiled faintly. "I kept them. I thought one day the family would pay for what they did to him. But Playfair found the journal first." "So you activated the horn?" Poirot deduced. "To frighten them. To shake the house from its false peace." "I wanted the truth to rise," she said simply. "And it did." Poirot looked around the chamber once more. "And yet you brought terror. You nearly drove a man to suicide. You turned mourning into fear." Tamsin's eyes were unreadable. "You call it terror. I call it justice." Poirot gave a small sigh, then nodded toward the tunnel's mouth behind her. "And now?" "I disappear," she said. "Back the way I came. The sea does not keep records." Poirot straightened his cuffs. "But you forget one thing, mademoiselle." She raised a brow. "You are not the only one who knows the way out." Before she could react, torchlight flickered from behind, the narrow end of the tunnel now crowded by 2 constables and Inspector Masson, guns drawn. Tamsin froze. Poirot gave her a small, sad smile. "Justice, mademoiselle, is not a thing one claims alone." Chapter 15. The Last Confession. Tamsin White did not struggle. She allowed the constables to lead her back through the winding tunnel in silence, her expression composed, almost tranquil, as though she had accepted the outcome long before the walls had closed in. Poirot followed behind, his gait unhurried, his mind gently sorting the last fragments of the case like pebbles into polished rows. Back at the lighthouse, under the cold beam of a constable's lantern, Tamsin sat on a bench near the horn mechanism. She glanced toward the sea beyond the glass, its dark surface unmarred and infinite. Inspector Masson stepped forward. "We've recovered enough from the tunnel to implicate her in tampering with the horn system. And Edward Crane's diary, well, it paints her influence clearly." Tamsin gave a slight smile. "Edward wasn't mad. He simply saw what the rest of you refused to." Poirot's voice, when it came, was soft. "Yes, mademoiselle, he saw cruelty, neglect, and he saw you." She turned to him. "I never meant for anyone to die." "Non," Poirot replied. "But you created the conditions where fear was a weapon, a very sharp one, and fear, mademoiselle, it cuts indiscriminately." She bowed her head slightly but said nothing. Masson gestured for the constables to take her away, and within moments the lighthouse was empty again, save for Poirot and the steady pulse of wind against the glass. He lingered, walked the spiral stairs one last time. In the lantern room, he paused by the rusted horn and placed a hand on its corroded frame. "A ghost horn," he whispered to himself, "not summoned by spirits, but by memory and guilt." By the following morning, Windward House had returned to its calm, curated silence. The sunlight filtered through the breakfast-room windows, catching the gleam of silver and the delicate rim of porcelain cups. Lady Eugenia sat opposite Poirot, her hands wrapped around a cup of Darjeeling. Her usual poise had returned, but there was a weariness about her eyes that no powder could conceal. "I never suspected Miss White," she said after a long silence. "She was so devoted, always quietly working in the archive rooms." "She believed she was delivering justice," Poirot said gently. "But vengeance taken alone always risks crossing a line." "She used poor Edward," Eugenia murmured. "Yes," Poirot said. "But Edward's writings, in the end, spoke clearly. His madness did not obscure his truth." Across the table, Iris Langley entered quietly, holding the recovered journal against her chest. "I'd like to finish his work," she said. "Restore the history, properly. Not just the scandalous parts, but all of it. The good, the tragic, the truth." Lady Eugenia gave her a long, searching look, then nodded. Poirot smiled faintly. "Then perhaps, mademoiselle, the horn has done one thing right. It summoned not ghosts, but the past itself. And the past, once seen in full light, loses its power to frighten." Iris nodded solemnly, her grip tightening on the journal. Later that afternoon, as Poirot's hired car crunched across the gravel drive, he cast one last glance at the cliffs. The sea stretched far and featureless, but in the air there was no fog now, only clarity. Hastings, who had returned from a brief detour in the village, looked up from the passenger seat. "I say, Poirot, quite the case, wasn't it? A horn that haunts, a secret tunnel, a forgotten air. Feels like something out of a Wilkie Collins novel." Poirot allowed himself a rare chuckle. "Ah, but mon ami, in truth, it is always the people, the devices, the atmosphere. Those are details. The real ghosts are within the human heart." Hastings nodded slowly, impressed. "Still, I can't help wondering, will the horn ever sound again?" Poirot turned to him with a knowing smile. "Only if someone chooses to listen." Chapter 16. The Silence That Remains. The train hissed like a beast at rest as it idled on the coastal platform, preparing for its journey inland. Poirot stood beneath the steel canopy, his suitcase at his feet, his coat buttoned neatly despite the warming sun. Hastings stood beside him, fidgeting with the ticket in his hand. "You know, Poirot," Hastings began, glancing toward the water's distant shimmer, "this one felt different, not because of the crime, but because of its ghosts." Poirot smiled faintly. "Because, mon ami, not all crimes wear bloodstains. Some wear sorrow." Hastings glanced sideways at him. "Tamsin White, do you think she ever believed she could get away with it?" "She did not plan to escape," Poirot said simply. "She planned only to reveal. Her justice was theatrical. She wanted a reckoning, not a pardon." He turned to watch a gull wheel over the platform, its cry sharp against the breeze. The horn was never about warning ships. It was about summoning memories, a sound to wake the dead. Hastings nodded slowly. "So it was never Edward Crane who kept sounding it?" The first time perhaps. But Miss White knew how to use his legend. She controlled the horn, the timing, even the fear. She played everyone's silence against them. He turned to face Hastings. "You see, in Windward House, silence was currency. Everyone paid for it. Lady Eugenia for the family name, Forley for his ambition, Tamsin for her grief, and even Edward, poor Edward, paid for it with his mind." Before Hastings could answer, the sharp whistle of the train pierced the air. Poirot bent to retrieve his suitcase, but as he straightened, a familiar voice called out, "Wait!" Iris Langley was hurrying along the platform, her scarf trailing like sea foam. She carried the leather-bound journal under one arm, a folded envelope in the other. Poirot turned, raising an eyebrow. "Mademoiselle?" She paused, breathless, holding out the envelope. "I found this tucked behind one of the wooden panels in the archive room. It's addressed to you." Intrigued, Poirot took the envelope and opened it. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting old-fashioned but unmistakable. Edward Crane. He read in silence. "Monsieur Poirot, if you ever find your way to Windward House, and if by some small miracle I am no longer there, I beg of you, forgive the ghosts, but do not forget them. We are not all mad. Some of us are merely waiting to be heard." E.C. Poirot's lips pressed into a tight line. He folded the note carefully and slipped it into his inner pocket. "Merci, mademoiselle. This is a fitting epilogue." Iris hesitated, then said softly, "He was lonely. Even when people were around, he felt like the fog, thin, transparent, easily blown away." Poirot touched her arm lightly. "Then let his memory be an anchor. Finish the history, not to erase the past, but to illuminate it." She nodded, eyes glistening, and stepped back as the train doors opened. Hastings clambered aboard, still mulling the weight of the case, while Poirot took one last look at the coastal horizon. The cliffs stood solemn against the sea, and from the lighthouse no sound came, not a horn, not a whisper. Just silence. Deep, watchful silence. Poirot took his seat, the journal still on his mind. "Do you know what strikes me most, Hastings?" he said quietly. "What's that?" "That the loudest sound in this whole affair, the horn, wasn't what condemned anyone. It was the silence between those blasts that told the truth." The train pulled away, the cliffs shrinking behind them, the wind sweeping past like a final sigh. Chapter 17. The Light Beyond the Fog. The wind at the station was brisk now, sweeping curls of dust across the platform as the train disappeared around the headland. In the distance, Windward House perched silently above the cliffs, its silhouette softened by the morning mist. Inside its stone walls, the echoes of secrets still lingered. Though the truth had been spoken, its weight remained. 3 days later, a modest funeral was held for Tamsin White in the village chapel. The attendees were few: Iris Langley, Lady Eugenia Hargreaves, and a scattering of locals who remembered Tamsin as a girl before her world was broken by loss. Poirot and Hastings attended from a respectful distance, seated in the rear pew. After the final hymn, Iris remained behind as the others filtered out. She knelt by the casket, not in prayer, but in thought. Poirot approached her quietly. "She did not ask for your forgiveness," he said gently, "but she hoped perhaps you would understand." Iris nodded. "I do. I think she was trying to bring light into the darkness the only way she knew how." She looked up at him. "But it was never really about revenge, was it?" "No," Poirot said. "It was about acknowledgement." She needed the silence broken. The horn was a call to memory, to truth, to remind those who had forgotten Edward Crane that he had once lived and had once loved. A silence passed between them, tender and heavy. "I've decided to stay in White Hollow," Iris said after a moment. "Finish the history, properly this time. Not just the noble names and dates, but the real story, the quiet ones, like Edward, like Tamsin." Poirot's face softened. "That is most wise, mademoiselle. The truth is not only in the facts, it is also in the hearts of those who remember." Outside the chapel, Lady Eugenia waited in her black veil, stoic as ever. She had not spoken much since the confession. Her pride had been pierced in ways deeper than scandal, betrayal, perhaps, not by others, but by her own unwillingness to see. Fawley had resigned his position quietly and left without ceremony. The estate was still hers, but the silence that followed her now was a very different kind. "Will she be all right?" Hastings asked Poirot as they walked the stony lane back toward the inn. "She will adapt," Poirot said, "as all survivors do. She has seen now what her silence cost. It is not too late to speak the truth, even if only to herself." They paused at a bend in the road. From here, the old lighthouse could be seen clearly, still standing despite its age and abandonment. No horn sounded now, just seagulls and waves and wind. "You know," Hastings said after a long pause, "I keep thinking of that last page in the journal, the one Edward wrote. It was not madness, only too much truth in a place that prefers lies. That line won't leave me." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "It should not. That line was his epitaph, Hastings, and also a warning." They stood in silence for a time, letting the wind pass through them. Then Poirot straightened his cuffs and adjusted his hat with finality. "Come, mon ami, there are no more ghosts here, only lessons." As they walked on, the fog finally began to lift, revealing the sea in its full, bright expanse. The lighthouse, though broken and weathered, still caught the light, and for a moment the glass at its crown reflected the sun so sharply it appeared to shine again, not with warning nor with fear, but with remembrance. Chapter 18. The Order of Things. The sitting-room of the White Hollow Inn was quiet, the late afternoon sun pooling across the lace-covered table like spilt honey. Poirot sat with his back straight, shoes polished, his fingertips pressed lightly together. Hastings, legs stretched out before him, sipped his tea with a mixture of satisfaction and lingering unease. "So that's it, then?" Hastings said at last. "Tamsin White, the horn, the stagecraft, the mask of the ghost, all for the truth about Edward Crane." Poirot nodded once. "Oui, it was her justice, her correction of a past swept too neatly under the rug." "And yet," Hastings said slowly, "she killed Playfair." A silence followed. Poirot's eyes drifted to the window where a lone gull cut through the sky. "She did," he said finally. "But we must consider the motive not merely in law, but in humanity. Mr. Playfair was not an innocent man. He profited from Edward's collapse, manipulated Lady Eugenia, and destroyed the life of a girl he saw as inconvenient. His power came not only from money, but from silence. Tamsin understood that, and chose to answer it with something louder. "Like a foghorn in the night," Hastings murmured. "Exactment." They sat for a moment in that fragile stillness. Then Poirot reached into his breast pocket and drew out a letter, its edges worn, the paper softened by time. "She left this," he said, "in the lighthouse, atop the inner stairwell, waited beneath a stone. I believe she meant it to be found, eventually." He unfolded it carefully and began to read aloud. "To the one who hears this. If you've made it this far, then perhaps the truth did not drown entirely. I loved Edward. That was my crime. I believed him. That was my punishment. The night he walked into the sea, he did not do so out of madness. He had been told, by a voice colder than the wind, that the only cure for disgrace was disappearance. The horn was our signal once. Now it is mine alone. I have sounded it not to summon ghosts, but to summon courage. You may call it murder. I call it memory." T.W. Hastings exhaled slowly. "Good Lord." "Yes," Poirot said softly. "She spoke the truth, even at the last." He folded the letter again, then placed it back into his pocket with reverence. The light in the room shifted subtly as a cloud passed over the sun, then cleared again. I wonder what the village will make of it, Hastings said after a moment. Of everything. They will whisper, Poirot said. They will deny, perhaps, or embellish, but they will not forget. And that, mon ami, is all Tamsin White truly wanted. A knock came at the door. It was the innkeeper's boy holding a small envelope. For you, sir, he said, handing it to Poirot. Poirot opened it. Inside was a single line written in delicate script. Let the light shine where silence once ruled. Il, he smiled faintly. Mademoiselle Langley keeps her promise. Hastings glanced over. The history? Poirot nodded. She will write it properly, the real one. Outside, the wind turned slightly, bringing with it the scent of the sea. The lighthouse, though still dormant, stood steadfast in the distance, no longer a place of haunting, but of remembrance. Poirot rose and adjusted his cuffs. It is time, Hastings, he said. Let us take one final walk along the cliffs before we depart. There is a certain clarity one finds where land meets sea. Hastings stood, brushing crumbs from his lap. You always do like a poetic farewell. Poirot allowed himself a faint smile. Ah, but this one has earned it.